Hello everyone, what's going on? This is the Noah Gillian Show, and I, of course, am your host, Noah Gillian. So happy you decided to join in today. It is the 16th of August, 2023, and on today's episode, we're going to start talking about the 2023 football season, finally, and start with our fantasy rankings for the upcoming season. Before we get into the show, please hit that subscribe button. If you're joining us on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, please give the show a follow, 5-star review. It really helps the podcast grow. Also, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram. All the handles to our social medias are going to be in the description below. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So we're going to start off with our 2023 fantasy quarterback ranks. Again, real quick before we get into it, please give us that 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, free way to help the show grow. So let's just jump into it. So everyone, here we are as a new season is ready to get underway. It's very important to look back where we've been to get an idea of where we are going. We did that over the last couple weeks in the form of our fantasy football audit series we did. So definitely make sure to go back and check that out if you missed that, just to get primed for the new season. As we move into said new season, we're going to start with the quarterback position as we normally do and discuss our ranks coming into the year as well as our strategy facing the position for this new campaign. So the quarterback position is one that has undergone a transformation, if you will. We talked about it last year. We talked about it a little bit on the audit pod that we did recently. And it's no different coming into the year. There is a lot of talent at the quarterback position. It seems to be getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And at this point, there are a number of stud quarterbacks in the NFL. Now, what does that mean for our game in fantasy football? Now, it was oftentimes the smarter strategy to wait for your quarterback. We talk about this a little bit. I feel like every time we talk about them, but just kind of going over our general strategy as we start the breakdown here. Generally, you wait. It's smarter to wait later in the quarterback pool. The difference between the high range quarterbacks and the lower range quarterbacks is usually not monumental. It's usually not as big as other positions, which grants itself to the strategy of taking other positions before your quarterback and waiting until you're in the later phases of your draft. That seems to be just old wisdom now. It seems to be, fairy tales, as a number of players, specifically at the quarterback position, are going very, very early. Now, it's not out of the realm of understanding or possibility that these quarterbacks used to go this high, but just as we look at the average draft position of a number of these guys, you have 3 quarterbacks projected to go in the second round of fantasy drafts. You have another 2 quarterbacks projected to go in the third round, another 2 in the fourth. So you have, after the first round, you have a multitude of quarterbacks going per round. Every round you get deeper into your draft, where that just was not the case even just a few years ago. What has changed? Why has it changed? Why is it such a big deal to get your quarterback earlier now? Well, the NFL in general is just changing. It's becoming much more of a pass-first league. Obviously, with all the stuff that's been going on around the running backs, a lot of people have seen the curtain get peeled back in terms of what the NFL wants to see. And what the NFL wants to see is a lot of points. They want to see the ball in the air. They want to see the ball completed in the air, and they want to see their superstars staying on the field. So what that has done is it's taking some weapons out of the tool belt of the defense in terms of being able to hit the quarterback, in terms of being able to hit the wide receivers, and really giving them free lanes to make plays and to be the explosive athletes that they are. And you're seeing that, and you're just seeing that play out in ADP. A number of guys who are just absolutely dominating the game, have totally taken advantage of the rules and have understood where this game is going. Offensive coordinators of teams have totally understood where the game is going in terms of the rule changes and just what the NFL continues to evolve into. And that's going to lead us kind of into, what our discussion here. I think a lot of players understand the value of a stud quarterback, and I think that's just being played out in the average draft position. So as we kind of get into our ranks here, it's, I think all around it's pretty similar to ADP, at least in mine. Again, just to kind of give a little bit of background before I get into my ranks and everything. I literally, for those watching on YouTube, I literally get my composition notebook out and I write it down. I get all my list of names on the one side and then I just rank it from there. So very minimal biases I like to have in this. Obviously, I still do my research. I listen to a ton of stuff. I read a ton of stuff to kind of help prime my mind. But then when it comes down to putting numbers next to names, I like to try to stay away from other people's ranks as much as possible, just so it kind of doesn't dilute my own thinking and to go around that. And this is what I came up with. Obviously, there's only so many quarterbacks in the league, so a lot of it will come down to a lot of it will be pretty similar, but there are a couple of names that I'm looking at here, especially in average draft position, which are a little different. So let's just jump right into it. So I think that everybody can pretty much agree that there is a top 3 tier in the quarterback position, and then after that tier there is a drop off to a next level, which includes a few quarterbacks, and then after that second level there is another drop down, and that plays itself out in the average draft position and also in my ranks too, just as we talk about tiers and we talk about breakdowns in that aspect. And a little aside here on the tiers, a lot of people may not think about it or may not use that strategy in their vocabulary or in their prep, but I think it's important to reiterate the importance of tiers. Now, what I mean by that is you talk about the position in general. You talk about players who have similar traits, who have similar outlooks, let's say, for the season. Now, the difference, let's say the top tier is 3 quarterbacks, and then the next tier is 5, or whatever the case may be. When you're looking at your tier-based drafting and your tier-based rankings and stuff, if you want that number 1 tier or you want that number 2 tier, you very rarely want to lead that tier off. Like, you'd very, very rarely want to take that first guy. But when you start to see those guys go, and then you're drafting and you're like, all right, well, there's only one guy left in this tier 1 of quarterbacks that I like, and all the other positions, whether it be running back or wide receivers, they don't really have any of my tier 1 guys left. All they, we're kind of into that tier 2 of wide receivers and running backs, whereas there's still kind of a tier 1 quarterback left on the board. You kind of look at it and you're like, okay, well, if I want to go running back or wide receiver, there's a number of players still on the board that I value similarly that I wouldn't mind going either way on. Whereas at the quarterback position, there's a very clear break and drop in value from that tier 1 guy to that, maybe that next group below him. So that's where you kind of got to prime your mind and think, okay, well, maybe I go quarterback here and then I come back and I can still get good, running backs or wide receivers that are similar to the opportunity cost you gave up when you took that quarterback earlier in a said round. So I just wanted to do a little aside on that because I think it's important, especially with the quarterback position, especially when you get later in the quarterback position. If you're waiting, you need to know when to jump in and when to just wait and let it play out. So let's start off at the top. Number one, Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is easily the best quarterback in the league. He is a perennial all-pro player. He is probably if he retired today, he might be a Hall of Famer. Probably no might about it. He is just that guy. And he's one of the very few guys who doesn't rush a ton. He's a guy who doesn't use his legs to get a lot of his fantasy value. Maybe a guy like Justin Fields or Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen, a lot of guys who get a lot of points from the ground, Lamar Jackson. And Patrick Mahomes just absolutely slings the ball. And I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. And he leads off this first tier for me. And I kind of mentioned a couple of the other guys. Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts are also included in this first tier. I think everyone can kind of agree they're in this top echelon here. But I have Patrick Mahomes number one. He's going number one on pretty much all major platforms in terms of average draft position at the quarterback position. And a lot of people, I think last year, were worried that he lost Tyreek Hill and that his production would in turn take a hit. And all Patrick Mahomes did last year was just absolutely go bananas. He just absolutely killed it. I want to see if I can, let me get his stats from last year. Patrick Mahomes set a career high in yards. All right. This is the same guy who threw for 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns en route to a MVP award in 2018. He threw for 5,200 yards and 41 touchdowns in 2022. He also had the second most rushing yards out of any year of his career, and he had 4 touchdowns, which were a career high on the ground. So he's a guy who I mentioned doesn't rely on his legs for a ton, but unlike a guy like Justin Herbert, who I talked about earlier on the quarterback audit series, Justin Herbert threw the second most yards in the league last year. But he's finished outside the top 10 at the quarterback position, mainly because he didn't do enough on the ground to give himself that extra buoyancy. Whereas Patrick Mahomes doesn't rely on the ground. He still uses it to his advantage. The last 3 years, 308 yards in 2020, 381 yards in 2021, and 358 yards in 2022. And then touchdown-wise, before last year in 2022, let's just look at every year he's been the starter and played more than 14 games. Touchdowns, he goes 2, 2, 2, 2, and 4. So he's always giving you something on the ground. And then in terms of yardage from 2018, 272, 218, and then 308, 381, 358. So he's always giving you something. And I think he is a guy that many people don't really expect to be active on the ground, but gets it done. And then, he'll throw for 5,200 yards and 40 touchdowns. So I have Mahomes number one. I think he's pretty much interchangeable with any of the top 3. If you want to go Josh Allen number one, if you want to go Jalen Hurts number one, I have no problem. I just am not going to bet against this guy, Patrick Mahomes, anymore. So he's going to be my number one guy. That brings us to Jalen Hurts. And he is my number 2 quarterback here. Now, last year, I had him a little bit lower. I wasn't really sure, and I didn't want to come off too aggressively with Jalen Hurts and the progressions that he was making as a passer, but he absolutely blew everybody out of the water last year. I mean, if it wasn't for a shoulder injury late in the year, he may or may not have won the most valuable player award in the National Football League. So he's just an absolute monster. And then here's where he really separates himself. 13 touchdowns on the ground for Jalen Hurts. I mean, an absolute monster on the ground. 760 yards and 13 touchdowns is just absolutely phenomenal. Just an explosive rusher. He got 165 carries. And that's not to take anything away from the ground, from the air. He threw about 30 more passes than he did in 2021. And he turned that into 600 more yards. So he threw for 3,700 yards and 22 touchdowns in the air. Only 6 interceptions too, so really took care of the ball in that aspect. And just absolutely dominated. I mean, there's just no other way to say it. He was a freak. He's continuing to get better. And his strength of schedule in terms of his quarterback rank isn't the best coming into the year, so I can understand why you might knock him down a little bit. It is 21st out of 32, so it's not phenomenal, but it is, it does lend itself to a potential to use his arm a little bit more and get into some more shootouts. A lot of people that watched the Eagles last year just saw a team that jumped out to leads very, very early a lot of the time, so didn't have to throw as much. Whereas I think this year their schedule is a lot tougher, so I could see him potentially having to put the ball in the air more. But this is just a guy, this is just all it's saying is just constant improvement. You're seeing a guy in terms of quarterback rating in 2020, he didn't play much in 2020. So when he became the full-time starter in 2021, was 87 quarterback rating, went up to 101. You're talking about completion percentage. I guess we'll include 2020 just to kind of show the growth. Quarterback rating was 77 to 87 to 101. And you're talking about completion percentage. Went from 52 to 61 to 66. Yards per attempt, 7.2, 7.3, 8. Just continuing to improve in all the efficiency metrics that you want to see from your quarterback. And I expect the rushing to still be there. The QB sneak is absolutely unguardable. So when they get on the goal line, they're giving it to Hurts. And I expect his arm to improve as well. I have him at number 2, and I think it's more than warranted. He could finish as the number 1 quarterback and was well on his way. In terms of fantasy points per game last year, he was the quarterback 1. So I could definitely see that happening again, which is why I have him at number 2. So for Josh Allen I have for my quarterback number 3, and this is the tier. This is the top tier for quarterbacks. If you can get one of these 3 guys, I think all of them are interchangeable. All of them are going to give you just ridiculous numbers on a week-to-week production level, and I think it's just obvious that these guys are pretty much there. I mean, you look at the average draft position for these guys, it goes Patrick Mahomes, it goes Josh Allen, it goes Jalen Hurts. All 3 of these guys are going in the second round of drafts. All 3 of these guys deserve to go at the second round of drafts. And in terms of across different platforms, all 3 of them are in the top 3 of average draft positions. So if you want them, you're going to have to pay up for them. But at the end of the day, I do think for these guys, it's worth it. Now, when we talk about Josh Allen specifically, this is a guy who, much like Jalen Hurts, utilizes his legs to his success. Over the last 2 years, in 2021, he had 763 yards. Last year, he had 762. And then 2 years ago, he had 6 touchdowns. And last year, he had 7 touchdowns. And that's just on the ground. When we're talking about through the air, if you include 2020, he's gone 4,500 yards and 37 touchdowns, 4,400 yards and 36 touchdowns, 4,200 yards and 35 touchdowns. So, has slightly been trending down in terms of yardage and touchdowns, slightly, if anything. But you're seeing a quarterback that is just not afraid to let it fly and put the ball in harm's way. Granted, that's not something you necessarily love. He did have 13 fumbles last year. He lost 5 of them. He did throw 14 interceptions. So this is something that I do think when you're talking about the top 3 and you're talking about that top tier, this is why I have him at number 3. You saw the best year of his career with Brian Daboll. He really unlocked everything that you wanted to see out of Josh Allen. And he kind of took a little bit of step back in terms of efficiency last year. But I do think that having those turnover problems does just, it knocks him down just a hair below a guy like Josh Allen, below a guy like Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts, who are very good at taking care of the ball while also getting you elite production. So, I say all that to say, before last year, Josh Allen was the back-to-back number 1 quarterback in fantasy in terms of total points. So this is a guy who is an absolute stud and, who deserves to be included in this top tier. And, that's where I have him. I have him at number 3. But like I said, I think these top 3 guys are in a tier of their own. You could take any of them over any of the other guys, and you're not going to get a complaint from me in the slightest. So now we move out of that number 1 tier and we move into the second tier of quarterbacks here. And I think this is a tier of 4 to 5, depending on how you want to look at it. And leading that tier for me is Lamar Jackson. I have Lamar Jackson as the number 4 quarterback in fantasy coming into the year. In terms of average draft position, he's going back-to-back with Joe Burrow, who I have a little bit lower, but I have Lamar Jackson number 5. When we talk about Lamar Jackson, it's always an interesting discussion. Everyone always assumes that this is a guy who wants to run, who loves to run, who needs to run to be a great quarterback. But this is also a guy who wants to stay in the pocket. This is a guy who is a pure pocket passer. And before last year, when he was struggling with injuries, really relied on that aspect of the game. I mean, you talk about in 2019 when he was the unanimous MVP, he threw for 3,100 yards and 36 touchdowns on a 66% completion percentage. He also ran for 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns, but you saw the efficiency in the pocket. And while his completion percentage has gone down over the last couple of years, it's gone from 66 in 2019 to 64 to 64 to 62, so slowly kind of dropping back. His attempts have also gone down. And I think that's something that shouldn't happen. His yards per attempt have also gone down almost every year, from 7.8 to 7.3, back up to 7.5, but then down to 6.9. So it seems like they're kind of taking some off of the plate of Lamar Jackson. I mean, 2019 and 2020, he had a quarterback rating of 113, and then he had a 99 quarterback rating. And then, they start to take more attempts away from him. They start to, limit his number of throws down the field. And then, his quarterback rating comes down a little bit. His completion percentage seems to come down a little bit, and he can't really get into that rhythm. His interceptions spiked in 2021 with 13. And he took a career high in sacks in 2021. Last year, he came out extremely hot and then, suffered some injuries and started to slow down a little bit. But this is a guy who, with a new offensive coordinator, Greg Roman no longer there, famously Greg Roman for a very run-heavy offense. Pat Ricard is their fullback, one of the teams that utilizes that. But they bring in a new offensive coordinator. They go out and they bring in Zay Flowers from the first round of the NFL draft. They go out and they sign Odell Beckham Jr. They still have Rashad Bateman. They still have Mark Andrews. So now you're seeing a commitment to the pass catching crew that Lamar Jackson will possess. Obviously, he signed a massive $250 million contract in the offseason. So the fact that they gave him the contract and they gave him some weapons after, Devin Duvernay was their number 1 for a large portion of last year and, cycling through all these receivers, I think it lends itself to Lamar having a very, very good year. And for the people that are saying, they're going to pass more, that's really going to take away from his ground game. It's going to increase his scrambles. And I think that is where Lamar Jackson is at his best. The designed runs are really, really nice, but they're better for a guy like Josh Allen or a guy like Anthony Richardson, who we may talk about later. Maybe a guy like Jalen Hurts, who's a little thicker, a little taller, and maybe can take a hit or two. Whereas Lamar, he wants to get you out in space. He wants to give you the ha-ha. He wants to give you the hee-hee. And he wants to get out and really, shimmy shake and get to the end zone. Whereas he's not running the quarterback power. He doesn't want to do that. So when you talk about throwing the ball more, I think that's going to really accentuate his strengths. And if his first read's not there, if his second read's not there, he breaks the pocket, his third read's not there, he's going to scramble out on the edge and in space. And then you're talking about everyone scrambling, all right, where Lamar's here. And then, they get cracked back by a tight end blocking him or something, and then Lamar's gone. So that's why I have Lamar Jackson at number 4 here, leading that second tier. If all breaks right, he is a guy that could join that top tier, could join the Mahomes, Hurts, and Allen tier. But just with the injury history, he's only played 12 games each over the last 2 seasons. Played 15 games, so he missed a game in 2019 and 2020 as well. So definitely a guy who's been nicked up. We can't just push that to the side. That's a really real issue with Lamar. But I do think that with the changing coordinator, the boost of weapons, the call to arms, if you will, I think it's just going to be a lot better. Hopefully they have a better year in terms of injury health. I think Rashad Bateman is an absolute stud at the wide receiver position, and Zay Flowers I think is a good add. Odell coming off injury, we know what Odell can do. So, while I may not love individual players on the team in terms of their fantasy outlook, I think the sum of parts in the Ravens offense is going to be extremely beneficial to Lamar. So I have Lamar at number 4 for the reasons as follows. Number five, I have Justin Fields. Yes, indeed I do. Justin Fields, quarterback for the Chicago Bears. Let's talk about where he's going in average draft position, because it's not number 5. It's number 7. So Justin Fields is going as the number 7 quarterback off the board, number 45 overall. And Justin Fields is this year's Jalen Hurts. And it's such an easy comp to make. They play similar styles, the third-year breakout, the addition of a wide receiver 1, a traditionally strong running game. Now they're going to start to pass more. I'm not making those comps. What I'm doing with Justin Fields is I'm understanding that this is a guy who, coming into the NFL, was not a superstar runner. That wasn't why he was in the NFL. It was because of his arm. It was because of how he threw the football. And it was because of his athletic traits, right? Now, what did Justin Fields do last year? Let's talk about it. 1,100 yards on the ground and 8 touchdowns, and his long rush was 67 yards. So this is a guy who can house it from anywhere on the field. This is a guy who, unlike Lamar, a little taller than Lamar, has about, almost 20 pounds about 15 pounds of weight more than Lamar Jackson. So this is a guy who can maybe take a little beating here or there, in terms of taking an extra hit or two. We obviously don't want that. But this is a guy who, in his rookie year, 73 quarterback rating and a 58% completion percentage. And then his second year, 85 quarterback rating, up to a 60% completion percentage. His yards per attempt went up. His attempts went up. So you're starting to see a growth there. His touchdowns, now granted he only went up, 30, 40 attempts, but his touchdowns went from 7 to 17, jumped up high. His interceptions stayed about the same. He took just a ridiculous amount of sacks last year, 55 sacks. Fumbled the ball 16 times, but only lost it twice. So you'd love to see that in terms of being able to retain the ball. And, one of the big things why I have him this high, you're talking about the second easiest strength of schedule for the quarterback position. This is a team that finished with the number 1 pick last year for a reason. They were absolutely disgustingly bad. And you're talking about a team in the Bears who play in a division now that's in flux. Obviously, the Packers got rid of Aaron Rodgers, so they're going to be going with Jordan Love. The Detroit Lions, while they were very promising last year, still haven't really shown it. They didn't make the playoffs last year, although they had a good year. And then you're talking about the Minnesota Vikings, who might have a historically bad defense this year, and want to push the ball, want to move the ball really quickly down the field and give the ball and score. And in terms, that gives the ball back to their opponent. So Justin Fields, I am expecting a jump in the air. He threw for 220 yards, he threw for 2,200 yards last year on a 60% completion percentage. I'm expecting 3,000. I'm expecting him to push to that 3,000 mark. He better clear 20 touchdowns through the air. Hopefully his interceptions stay around the same, that 10 to 11 range. I wouldn't be mad. But he needs to get 62% completion percentage, 3,000 yards, 20 plus touchdowns. And that's what I expect from him, and that's what I think he will do. They added to the offensive line with the 10th overall pick, or wherever they moved back from 1 to 9, and then they moved back from 9 to 10 with the Eagles, and they drafted an offensive lineman at number 10 out of Ohio State, I believe, Broderick Jones. I could be wrong on the name there, but one of the top tackles in the NFL. They obviously go out, they get DJ Moore. Maybe Chase Claypool can show up a little bit more. I've always really liked Darnell Mooney. Cole Kmet just signed a contract extension in Chicago. I'm a big fan of Khalil Herbert, their running back. I believe they got Roscoe Johnson from Texas, the running back who was Bijan Robinson's lightning, if you will, to pair with Bijan's thunder at Texas. So they provided him some weapons. I'm not going to say DJ Moore's on the same level as a AJ Brown or a Stephon Diggs in terms of getting a quarterback a weapon, or a Tyreek Hill for Tua Tagovailoa. I'm not going to say he's on that level, but this is a guy who's put up 1,000 yards every single year in Carolina, where he meets the quarterback in the huddle pretty much with how quickly they were moving through quarterbacks last year. So he is a very capable receiver. And it just bumps everybody else down the pecking order a little bit. I would love for them to add a little bit more to the outside. A reason why Jalen Hurts is so good is because he's got AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. Obviously Joe Burrow's a stud, but one of the reasons he's so great is he's got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Reason why Tua is so great, he's got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. These guys are making leaps because of the outside production. So I'm expecting Fields to take a step forward in the air. I am expecting him to take a little bit step back on the ground. I'm not expecting 1,100 yards on the ground, but I'm expecting 750 and 8 again. We talked about it with Jalen Hurts. Talked about it with Josh Allen. That 750 yard range is where you want to live. You don't want to live over 1,000 yards because that means you're running a little bit too much. Obviously, it'd be great. If he could do that and not get hurt, we'd love it. But he did deal with some injury last year. Let's not forget it. He did play 15 games. He dealt with some injury down the stretch, getting dinged up from running the ball so much. So let's bring the attempts down a little bit, from the yardage down a little bit. Let's pick your spots where to run, but still showcase that ability that allowed you to get a 67-yard long rush last year that allowed you to score 8 touchdowns. So Justin Fields, I have at number 5. I'm very, very high on him. Obviously higher than consensus in terms of he's going as the number 7 quarterback in terms of average draft position. That brings me to number 6. Number 6, I got Joey Burrow. Now, I was extremely low on him last year. Not really out of any intent, but just, I didn't really love the pocket passers. And what did Joe Burrow do? He absolutely went out and shut me up. I mean, he went nuts last year. They started the year 0-2, and a lot of people were like, here it is. It's a Super Bowl hangover. They're not really ready to play. And then Joe Burrow just absolutely spazzes. 4,400 yards, 35 touchdowns. He also ran for 250 yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground. So more than I expected. This is what I was talking about with Justin Herbert, how he and Patrick Mahomes, you're expecting them to really dominate in the pocket and throw the ball. But to be those elite of elite options, you need them to give you something. And the 5 touchdowns on the ground, the 250 yards on the ground help that out. And this is just a guy who's just one of the best pure throwers in the league. And they're finally letting him throw the ball. Let's talk about just his career, how it's looked. Obviously, he suffered the torn ACL in his rookie year. But at that point, he had 400 passing attempts in 10 games, 65% completion percentage. Is next year in 2021. Played every single game. 108 quarterback rating. They let him throw 520 times, 70% completion percentage for 4,600 yards. Just ridiculous efficiency. And he threw the ball at 8.9 yards per attempt. So absolutely ridiculous. And then last year, 100 quarterback rating, threw the ball 600 times for a 68%. Do you guys understand how ridiculous that is? He threw the ball 600 times. That's more than almost anybody in the league. And he completed 68% of his passes. Just absolutely ridiculous. 4,400 yards, like I said, 35 touchdowns. Still pushed the ball down the field with a 7.4 yards per attempt. But that did come down a little bit, obviously, from the 8.9 in 2021. So this guy is an absolute stud. Now, in 2021, he only ran for 118 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. So really didn't give you that extra juice on the ground that he gave you in 2022. Honestly, I expect him to kind of fall somewhere in between there. Maybe like 180, 190, 200 yards, 3 touchdowns on the ground, and maybe that brings him back a little bit. But when you got Jamar Chase, when you got T. Higgins, when you got Tyler Boyd, when you got Joe Mixon, like when you got these stud, and then you got a guy who puts it on time, on target, on the money every single time, he's going to be a stud. I don't know if he's got quite the upside to be number 1 or number 2 or number 3, but he definitely, I believe he finished at number 4 last year, maybe even number 3. But without guys getting hurt, I don't know if he can clear guys like Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts or Patrick Mahomes, but he has the upside to be that mid to high range quarterback 1, and he's going ahead of, Justin. He's going as the number 4 quarterback off the board here. So I have Lamar over him. I have Justin Fields over him. He's going ahead of both of those guys in terms of average draft position. He's going 1 point after Lamar Jackson, so I don't know why he's ahead of him here. But him and Lamar are pretty much going back-to-back in the 3rd round. So, I don't love the no rushing, but he is honestly just one of the best pure throwers of the football in the entire league. So when you talk about that aspect of the game, Joe Burrow is a phenomenal pick, but I do have him at number 6 on my ranks. Number 7 here, this is a guy who I was extremely high on last year, and just, he struggled, but there was a number of reasons, so let's get into it. Justin Herbert, I have at number 6. Last year, week 2, breaks his ribs on national TV against the Kansas City Chiefs, stays in the game somehow, and almost wins it. They lose by 3 points in Arrowhead against Kansas City Chiefs. He throws for 334 yards, 3 touchdowns. Just an absolute, beast performance from Justin Herbert. But he broke his ribs. Let's call it what it is. He kind of struggled after that. The very next week he struggled. But this is a guy who did not miss a game, right? He broke his ribs and he did not miss a game. Played every single snap of the game, of the season. He threw the ball one shy of 700 times. So this was a guy who was pushing it down the field. 68% of his passes were completed, threw for 4,700 yards, only 25 touchdowns, and again, didn't run for any on the ground and only ran for 147 yards. So where can Justin Herbert improve? His touchdown rate. His touchdown rate was well below average. Rushing the ball, I don't think he was quite as mobile as he wanted to be because of the injury. They probably told him to stay in the pocket a little bit more, but this is a guy who has the athletic ability to do it. You saw in his career up to this point in 2020, he ran for 234 yards and 5 touchdowns, so similar to what Joe Burrow did last year. In 2021, he ran for 302 yards and 3 touchdowns. And then last year, just a similar attempts to what he's done, but only 147 yards, no touchdowns, a career high in fumbles and fumbles lost. So I think that with the additions that they made, Quentin Johnson, 1st round pick out of TCU, they also have, obviously, Keenan Allen, one of the best route runners in the league. They have Mike Williams, one of the best deep ball threats in the league. They have Josh Palmer as their number 4 wide receiver, or probably number 3. A great number 3 wide receiver in an NFL offense. Then you add Quentin Johnson. You obviously have Austin Eckler out of the backfield. And like I kind of mentioned with Lamar Jackson, while maybe all his weapons might steal some production from each other, it's just going to be good news for Justin Herbert. And I think that he is a sneaky MVP pick. Last year I was all in on the Chargers, and his injury, along with a number of other things, kind of, their wide receivers injuries as well, kind of helped, hurt them, hindered them from being all they could be. But at the end of the day, Justin Herbert is one of the best pure throwers of the football in the league. And with all the weapons he has now, I expect him to be just as good, as he was in 2021, honestly. In 2021, he threw for 5,000 yards, 38 touchdowns. He ran for 300 yards and had 3 touchdowns. I expect a year similar to that, in terms of just the statistical output of what he did last year. He also... He lost Rashawn Slater, one of the best tackles in the league last year, I believe in week 2. He like tore his bicep or tricep or whatever it was and was out for the year. So you're talking about getting an all-pro level lineman back, also adding a first-round wide receiver in Quentin Johnson, just to the room that he had. And then he's also healthier. He doesn't have the broken ribs. I expect him to have a very, very good year, and I have him at number 7. He's going in that fifth roundish, that fifth round. He's going right in between Lamar Jackson and Justin Fields. Oftentimes, Justin Herbert and Justin Fields will go very close to each other. So, heads up, I'll take Justin Fields, but at the end of the day, I'll be happy with either one. And as we kind of move through the ranks and talk about general strategies and then a side I have, this is the area where I want to live. I want to live in that I want to live in that 5 to 7 to 8 range in terms of average draft position. If Lamar slips maybe a little bit into the 4th round, I'll jump on him. But Justin Herbert, Justin Fields in that 4th, 5th round, that is where I feel like you can get the maximum value because you're still getting an upper tier level guy. Justin Fields has the chance to be the number 1 quarterback in all of fantasy if all breaks right? And you're getting him in the 5th round. Like, I waited and I took Jalen Hurts last year in the 6th round in a league, and he was absolutely phenomenal. Whereas I could take a guy early and he'll probably be good, but why not let me get that extra running back and then take a lottery ticket on one of these guys in the mid rounds who, even if they're not the number 1, they'll still be a really, really good quarterback 1. So I'm not really losing out on that production, but at the same time, they have that upside and I don't quite have to pay the price of Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts or Patrick Mahomes to get that chance to get it. Now, it's probably a smaller chance to be the number 1 quarterback, which is why I'm getting that discount, but I think the opportunity cost that you're giving up in terms of wide receiver and running back is a little too much for me in my draft. So as we move through the top 10 here, we have Trevor Lawrence is a guy I have at number 8. I think Trevor Lawrence is absolutely going to explode this year. We're talking about some things that we learned in our audit series, and one of those things was to look at play callers, was to look at offensive minds with these quarterbacks, and you've pointed nobody else but Trevor Lawrence. Let's talk about his 2 seasons in the NFL so far. 2021, he had Urban Meyer in his first year as an NFL head coach and his only year as an NFL head coach. And in year 2, he has Doug Peterson, Super Bowl winning head coach, quarterback guru, if you will, and a very strong offensive mind. Been around a number of phenomenal quarterbacks and has coached a number of phenomenal quarterbacks. So when you're talking about the 2 seasons, but he played 17 games in both seasons. He had pretty much the same number of attempts in both seasons, 602 in 2021 and 584 in 2022. And what you're seeing in terms of 2021, 59% completion percentage, 6 yards per attempt. In 2022, 66% completion percentage, 7 yards per attempt. So he's pushing the ball further down the field per attempt. He threw it less technically in terms of attempts. He went up 7 percentage points in terms of completion percentages. He threw for 500 more yards. He threw for 4,100 yards last year and 25 touchdowns. Just look at, so I'm just going to go down here because I'm jumping all over the place. I feel like this is just a great way to, so I'm going to go 21, 22, and I'm going to go down the list. So in 21, 71 quarterback rating. In 22, he had a 95 quarterback rating. In 21, he had 595 completions. He jumped that up to 387 completions in 2022. And that came with a 25% decrease, or excuse me, a 25 decrease in attempts. So he threw the ball less and completed the ball more. Also had a 24 jump in quarterback rating. He also had a 7% jump in completion percentage. He went from 59 to 66. In terms of total yards, he went 3,600 to 4,100. In terms of yards per attempt, he went from 6 to 7. Touchdowns, he went from 12 to 25. Interceptions, he went from 17 his rookie year to 8. He also took 5 less sacks. So you're talking about just across the board, just an across the board improvement all around. And in terms of his rushing, he ran the ball a little bit less, but he scored 3 more touchdowns and still had 290 yards. Fumbled the ball a little bit more, which I don't love. He had 9 fumble lost, which is really not great. But overall, he gives you that upside on the ground too. And that's why he's such an interesting quarterback to rank, because he does give you that little bit of athleticism on the ground while being one of the better pure passers in the league. And when you're talking about some of the numbers he put up last year, 4,100 yards, 25 touchdowns, upside wise, he could break 5,000. Obviously, with Calvin Ridley, they traded for him last year at the trade deadline. They sat out the suspension, and now he's ready to go. They still have Zay Jones. They still have Christian Kirk. They re-signed Evan Ingram. They have Travis Etienne. They go out and they draft Tanks Bigsby. The offensive line's still a work in progress, but it is in progress, and we expect it to be a little bit better this year. And just the terms of pedigree, right? This is a guy who was the number one pick in the NFL draft, and was like pretty much the presumptive number one pick. If you get the number one pick, you're taking Trevor Lawrence. He's that guy. He's generational. He's next Peyton Manning, yada, yada, yada. 6'6", 220, just a stud, everything in college, all the stuff you want. That's this guy. And Doug Peterson, I think, can get that out of him. I think when you look at a guy like Doug Peterson, he puts his quarterbacks in a position to succeed. And just the year-over-year games, let's talk about the game log. Kind of struggled early in the year, but then, when you talk about as the year got on, really, he had a quarterback 1 finish in week 14, a quarterback 5 finish in week 15, 5 finish in week 12. So before their bye, he had 4 top 10 finishes, right? And that's how many games is that? That's 10 games. He only had 4 top 10 finishes in that, and and 4 of those were outside the top 20. So you're talking about a guy who's had 4 top 10s and also 4 outside the top 20. When you look at the end of the season, he had 7 games after their bye. He had 3 of those games in the top 10, including a number 1 overall finish, and 2 of them were outside the top 20. So you're kind of seeing still a little bit of that boom bust, but you're seeing maybe a way higher ceiling and a little bit more in control of that outside the top 20 range. So you saw him really start to gain some confidence as the year went on. And this is also including the last week of the season where, he really didn't, it was a tough game with Tennessee. Overall, this also includes a 31-3 win in Week 17 where he finished as the quarterback 32. He finished as the quarterback 32, and they won the game 31-3. So that just shows you a game where they got up big, and he didn't really have to do anything except go 17 for 21 for 521 yards. So even that, like the games that the team blew teams out, he could have done a little bit better in that game too. So I think his upside is still baked into that growth that he showed with Doug Peterson. So I have him at number 8. As we move on here, I have Deshaun Watson at number 7. Now, he was a guy who I had to add late. He was a guy I kind of forgot about when I was doing my ranks here, and I got to put him in here. This is a guy who is probably the biggest enigma when it comes to quarterbacks here. He is going at number 9 off the board in terms of average draft position, but he is going 82 overall, whereas Trevor Lawrence, the quarterback that's going 1 slot ahead of him in terms of average draft position for quarterbacks, Trevor Lawrence is going 54th overall, and Deshaun Watson is the very next quarterback coming off the board at 82nd. So you're seeing that tier breakdown. This is where I was talking about a little, so I'm just going to kind of illustrate it a little bit. Justin Herbert, number 6. You're talking about him going 42nd overall, Justin Fields going 45th overall, Trevor Lawrence going 54th overall. Then, as you get into that back end, number 9 overall is Deshaun Watson at 82. The next quarterback, Dak Prescott, 84. Tua Tagovailoa, 90. Then the next quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, 110. So you kind of see those tier breakdowns in terms of average draft position. Deshaun Watson, let's just call a spade a spade. Deshaun Watson has the chance to be the number 1 quarterback in all of fantasy, given his rushing ability along with the team that he plays for. Before he missed a number of games, before he missed the entire 2021 season and half of the 2022 season for reasons that have been talked about at length, he was an absolute dominant force in the fantasy community. In 2018, he threw for 4,100 yards and 26 touchdowns. He ran for 500 yards and another 5 touchdowns. In 2019, threw for 3,800 yards, 26 touchdowns, ran for 413 yards, and scored 7 touchdowns on the ground. in 2020, arguably his best season of his career. He threw for 4,800 yards and 33 touchdowns. Oh yeah, he ran for 400 yards on the ground too and 3 more touchdowns. And then obviously missed all that time, and he came back last year and was a shell of himself. He had a sub 60% completion percentage when he'd never broken that in his career, at an all-time low yards per attempt in 6.5. He only ran for 175 yards on 36 attempts. His yards per attempt were at a career low. He did still rush a touchdown in, so he gave you that. But this is a guy who hasn't played in a very, very long time. And you talk about a team that I'm really in on in the Browns this year. I love Nick Chubb. I love Amari Cooper. I love their offensive line. Kevin Stefanski is a good offensive coordinator. Elijah Moore, they seem to be getting a lot out of on the outside now. They have David Njoku at the tight end position. They have a lot of weapons there for Deshaun Watson to take that step back into stardom. He was the quarterback 4 in back-to-back years, so he's got that in him. It just comes down to whether you believe he can return to that form after missing an entire season and then half of another season. One reason I do have a little bit of optimism is he was able to play 6 games last year and get a little tape on. Now he's going through a full off season of getting all the reps as a starter, because last year, let's not forget, they had to give a lot of the first team reps to Jacoby Brissett because they knew Deshaun Watson was going to miss a lot of the season with his suspension. So they had to give reps to Jacoby Brissett. So even in the training camp, he wasn't getting all the reps. So this year, he's the undisputed starter. He's getting all the reps he can. And it just comes down to what you believe. I mean, if he never missed time and he was coming into this year, he would probably be a top 5 rank quarterback in my ranks. But you're just talking about a guy who we haven't seen it for a couple of years. And I totally get each side of the argument when it comes to Deshaun Watson. And it just comes down to what do you believe. He just really looked terrible on film last year. But this is also a guy who, like I said, threw for 4,800 yards and 33 touchdowns and ran for, 400, 500 yards and upside of 7 touchdowns. So and this guy is only 27 years old. He's 6'3", 225. He's got the frame for it. He's in his prime of his career. He's got the 23rd strength of schedule for quarterbacks, so not the best. Plays in a tough division. So it's just he is the definition of a boom bust quarterback this year. He could be the number 1 quarterback in fantasy. And I don't think anybody would be shocked, right? But he could also be, what he was last year, just, the 18th, 19th best quarterback and really struggled to get it going. So I have him at number 9. I think that's fair given that assessment. Number 10, this is a guy who I put Deshaun right in front of. I actually had it number 9 before I put him in. Geno Smith. Now, Geno, absolute journeyman to a certain degree. This is a guy who's going as the number 15th quarterback off the board. All right, I have him at number 10. 114 overall off the board. And this is a guy who just last year just dominated. He was a top 10 quarterback at the position. He might have even been higher than that. But I'm just trying to see if I can get his... I might not be able to get it. Regardless, this is a guy last year who threw for 4,200 yards, 30 touchdowns, and he ran for 366 yards on the ground and also scored a touchdown himself. So, this is a guy who has figured out how to play in the NFL. In 2021 for Seattle, he played 4 games, backing up Russell Wilson. 68% completion percentage, 7.4 yards per attempt. Looks good for his efficiency metrics. What did he do the next year with another 500 attempts and played all 17 games? Played all 17 games, let's not mind you. And coming off a 103 quarterback rating, put up to 100 quarterback rating, 69% completion percentage, 7.5 yards per attempt. And he did his thing. 4,200 yards, like I mentioned, 30 touchdowns, 11 picks. But he also ran the ball 68 times and got freaky on the ground as well. So this is a guy who has learned throughout his career where he needs to be. And let's just talk about where he's playing. Seattle. They have 3 stud wide receivers. 3. They might have the best wide receiver room in the league. And that's saying a lot. They have DK Metcalf, They have Tyler Lockett, and they drafted Jackson Smith and Jigba in the first round of the NFL draft. First wide receiver off the board. With DK and Tyler Lockett, they go out and they get Jackson Smith and Jigba. They also have Kenneth Walker, and they go out and they draft Zach Charbonnet. So they have 2 really, really good running backs. They have 3 really good wide receivers, and they have a lot of continuity. They have an offensive line who had 2 rookie tackles last year who performed very, very well. So now you got them coming back for a second year. You got DK and Tyler Lockett along with Geno Smith and Kenneth Walker, who played a lot again last year. And then you got a couple rookies who are stepping in and can learn behind veterans ahead of them. Hopefully the offensive line stays healthy and continues to grow. And they have a good defense as well in Seattle. So they're going to have an opportunity to possess the ball multiple times throughout a possession. Maybe that limits his total upside where he's not going to be having to throw the ball a ton, but I expect Seattle to be a very good team, and I expect Geno to put up another top 10 season, honestly. I mean, he's going at quarterback 15, and you potentially get a quarterback 1. This is the guy who you wait for, right? This is the guy who I was talking about. You usually wait for your quarterbacks, right? This is a guy who you wait for, and you can get a top 10 quarterback this late in the draft, 114 overall, 15th quarterback off the board, and you can get a legit starter. So I have Geno at number 10. I think he's going to be great right there. I have Dak Prescott at number 11. I have a interesting relationship with Dak Prescott. I've never had him on a fantasy team. This is a guy who's going number 10 in terms of quarterbacks off the board, number 84 overall. He's going right in that pack with Tua and Deshaun Watson. And last year, it was not his best year. Let's just call it what it is. Obviously dealt with his injury. He broke his thumb early in the year. So that was, definitely a hindrance to him. So we'll look at 2021. I mean, this is a guy who's always been 99, 104, 91 quarterback rating, completion percentage, high 60s, 65, 68, 68, 66 last year even. Pushed the ball down the field usually, 8.2 yards per attempt, 8.4, 7.5, 7.3. And coming off a year in 2021 where he had 4,400 yards, 37 touchdowns, looks really good. But Dak has turned into a guy who is not going to run the ball anymore. And that's not me slighting him. That's just looking at the numbers. Early in his career, you're talking about he's been in the league for 7 years now. Early in his career, his rookie year, 282 and 6 touchdowns on the ground. 357, 6 touchdowns on the ground. 305, 6 touchdowns on the ground. 277, 3 touchdowns on the ground. And then you talk about the last 3 seasons. In 2020, he only played 5 games. He had 93 yards on the ground and 3 touchdowns. So was pacing to continue to do that. He had that obviously gruesome ankle injury, and maybe that has kind of taken a little bit of his mobility away. Because in 2021, only 48 attempts, 146 yards and 1 touchdown. Last year, played 12 games, 45 attempts, 182 yards, 1 touchdown. So you're just kind of seeing the pullback in his mobility. And I think that's why he is going where he's going. Right down at that 11, back end quarterback 1. If you could get him as a second quarterback in a 2 quarterback league, I think you'd be really, really happy. But he is just a guy who I think is going to be consistent. He's going to struggle to have those spike weeks, and really, win you weeks, but he is going to be a reliable week-to-week starter for you in fantasy. That's why I have him at number 11. And that's where I think he kind of settles in. So, number 12, rounding out our top 12 quarterbacks, got Tua Tagovailoa. Obviously a very, very interesting player. Obviously dealt with a number of serious concussions last year, which hindered his ability to be on the field. And obviously his health is the number one thing in terms of his health is the number one thing in just terms of everything. But you were really seeing an ascension last year from Tua in terms of just his output of yardage. He's always been an extremely accurate quarterback, high 60s in terms of completion percentage. Quarterback rating was up to 105 last year. Still played 13 games despite his concussion problems and missing games. And he threw 3,500 yards and 25 touchdowns. Obviously, when you got guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and all those running backs they have, and you're gonna have an opportunity to be successful. And I think he's just in that boat with Dak Prescott, and Geno Smith and, these guys like, Russell Wilson, maybe Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins. Like, he's in this boat with these guys just because he's not really going to run the ball much. But if he stays healthy for 16 games, he's going to have a chance to throw for 4,500 yards and 35 plus touchdowns and, be in that back end quarterback one mix, maybe that mid quarterback one mix. I'm just a little nervous with the concussions. I'm nervous with his head injuries. I'm just nervous that it could take him out for a few weeks, and maybe his next one could be his last one. It could be his last snap in the NFL. And I obviously don't want to see that. I don't want to, think that that's going to happen. But at the same time, you fantasy football is an entire game of risk and probability. And I think that for Tua Tagovailoa, there is a strong chance that, maybe his next snap in the NFL, there's chances that it could be his last. And I don't want to have my fantasy team hinge on that balance. Obviously, when we're talking about the guy's health, when we're talking about concussions, when we're talking about his brain, my fantasy team doesn't mean anything. But I just am saying that from that the lens which we're looking at through it on this pod. That's just kind of the route that I take. He's still an elite quarterback in terms of getting the ball where it needs to go. He's got two elite options in Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. So I totally get waiting and taking a guy like Tua late, especially if you take Tyreek or Jalen Waddle early and having that stack. That could be a really deadly stack. But he is a guy in Tua Tagovailoa who you're going to want to pair later with a guy like maybe Anthony Richardson, who just got named the starting quarterback for Indy for week 1. Maybe a guy like Geno Smith you get later to pair with them, or Russell Wilson or Jared Goff. Maybe you pair someone with Tua to ensure that you have that position covered. So that's kind of my take on Russell Wilson. That's my take on the top 12 at the position. Outside of the top 12, I kind of ranked right outside. Number 13, I had Russell Wilson. Number 14, I had Aaron Rodgers. 15, Kirk Cousins. 16, Jared Goff. 17, Matt Stafford. Something you'll notice with all these quarterbacks is they're a little bit older and they're all pocket guys. Aside from Jared Goff, all a little bit older guys that have dealt with some injuries. Last year, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, Matt Stafford all dealt with injuries. Kirk Cousins probably should be higher just because he's just always so consistent, but he's just the definition of like a low-end quarterback one, consistent, not really going to win you many weeks, but maybe I'll have 1 or 2 weeks where he's like the number 4 quarterback on the week or the number 3, but just the lack of rushing from all these guys. Maybe Russell Wilson runs a little bit more, but I don't think that he's really keen to do that. So I think all these guys are just on that outside looking in, potentially. Another name I wanted to talk about, Anthony Richardson, I mentioned a couple times. Because he's the starter now, and his rushing ability, obviously his arm is not there yet. It's still very raw. The weapons aren't phenomenal in terms of Michael Pittman Jr. and Alec Pierce. They have a strong running game with Jonathan Taylor more than likely and a great offensive line. So, I don't expect phenomenal numbers, but because of his rushing ability, he will have weeks where he is a starting, a top 12 quarterback at the position for fantasy, and he is a great guy to pair with maybe Geno Smith later, or, maybe a guy like Tua, like I said, pair Anthony Richardson, or if you get, Aaron Rodgers and you want to take Anthony Richardson. He's a guy to keep on your bench to see how the season progresses along. And maybe toward the back end of the year, you end up trading Geno for, a wide receiver 3, and then you start Anthony Richardson just to boost your starting lineup. So he's a guy who, if you're willing to take the roller coaster ride, I could see him being good. A couple other names I'll mention here. Daniel Jones, I think could be solid. Good quarterback too in a super flex. Jordan Love, I kind of think could be pretty solid as a quarterback too in a super flex as well. Sam Howell, I kind of like. Ryan Tannehill, or Kenny Pickett. These guys, I think are all, Brock Purdy, Derek Carr, I think are all just quarterback 2s, not really seeing the quarterback 1 upside in them. And so for those reasons, they are outside of my list. So that's going to wrap up kind of our talking about the quarterback position. For today, I think it's pretty solid list, if I do say so myself. I took a little bit of risks outside of ADP with some of the guys, so I do feel there is that kind of uniqueness to them, and it's not just a chalk ADP. So, I think it's really, really interesting to have these discussions. If there's anyone that, you guys totally feel is totally out of pocket or crazy, leave a comment on the video if you're on YouTube. Send us a video or send us a message on social media if you're listening on the pod and you want to dispute something, and we'll definitely go have a nice little back and forth on there. But that is going to wrap up the show for today in our quarterback ranks. We will be back with our running back and wide receiver very, very soon. So you can definitely keep an eye out to look for that. Once again, in the description below are all our social media handles, and you can follow us there. Feel free to shoot us any questions, and we'll answer it on the show. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here again next time.